Well, welcome back to State of the Nation tonight with me, Matt Goodwin, right here on GB News. Now, we have just been hearing about the bombshell news regarding the defection of Nadine Dorries to Reform, joining Nigel Farage and his growing crusade to take over the UK's political system. Let's get the latest on this with GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Catherine, firstly, what are you hearing about this defection? And secondly, how significant is it, do you think?
Well, good evening from Birmingham, where Reform launched their autumn conference tomorrow. Look, this is a spectacular win for Nigel Farage. Make no mistake, they are absolutely delighted. He has said he's absolutely delighted, and it will be a great boost, he says, to our campaign to win the next general election. Nadine Dorries was a culture minister under Boris Johnson. She was a huge admirer of Boris Johnson. She was Conservative MP for 18 years, a working class girl who made very, very good indeed. But she's given an interview to the Daily Mail and she has said on X, the Conservative Party cannot win the next election. It removes election-winning prime ministers, by that she means Boris Johnson, and replaces them with duds. She goes on to say, its members now need to think the unthinkable and look to the future. Now, this is not, of course, the first Conservative defection. We've had a few of them. Andrea Jenkins, she was a Conservative MP. She's now Reform's first mayor. Jake Berry, former party chairman, has gone to Reform as well. But it's certainly the most significant and by a mile, and really, really terrible news for the Conservative Party, who simply said, we wish Nadine well. A former aide, apparently unnamed, has said good riddance, not a fan. The Lib Dems having a lot of fun with this. They say, we don't know who to feel more sorry for, Kemi Badenoch or Nigel Farage. The Labour Party, of course, wrapped up in their own problems with Angela Rayner. But I think in some ways, this is not surprising. The Conservatives can see the way the wind is blowing. Nigel Farage's favourite to be the next Prime Minister. Reform storming ahead in the polls. The Conservatives really doing terribly, terribly badly. But in other ways, I think it is quite surprising, and for two reasons. First of all, Boris Johnson. Both Andrea Jenkins, who's now a Reform mayor, and Nadine Dorries particularly, were massive admirers of Boris Johnson. To them, he could really do no wrong. And, Nadine Dorries resigned. She thought she was going to get a seat in the House of Lords. It didn't happen. She wrote a book saying that there were dark forces at work that had plotted to take Boris Johnson out. But she's now saying that the Conservative Party is finished. She's given up hope. Now, I interviewed Boris Johnson just a couple of days ago for GB News, and he told a very, very different story. He said, of course not, of course we're going to come back. The one point on which they were agreed was, in their view, it was a terrible mistake to get rid of Boris Johnson. He says that he would have won the election. The next election, of course, we'll never know because it was taken out of his hands. But I think it is extraordinary to have such a loyalist to Boris Johnson has given up, presumably on a comeback from him, though I don't think Boris Johnson has given up on a comeback from him at all, having interviewed him the other day. But the other thing I think is interesting is the Online Safety Act. Now, this was Nadine Dorries' baby when she was culture secretary. She worked very, very hard on it. She felt extremely passionately about it. It was watered down. The legislation that we now have was watered down from what she originally intended. She was unhappy about that. But now she's gone to a party where Nigel Farage has just gone to America, slating the Online Safety Act, saying that we should get rid of it, that sure, he wants to keep children safe, but he doesn't quite know how that would happen. And I do think that that is quite extraordinary. But look, Nigel Farage and Reform will be absolutely cock a hoop with this. It will put a real spring in their step, not that they really need it at the moment.
As a journalist, I always need to remember more in less time. And you know what I really hate? Taking notes. It wastes loads of time and you forget stuff. And that's where Plord comes in. This is the Plord Notes, a sleek, pro-level AI note-taker that records and creates notes for you. Whether you're listening to a long podcast, stuck in a meeting, or on an important call, Claude captures everything at the tap of a button. Then it gives you a smart, structured summary with all of the key takeaways. It even recognises different speakers by their voice, and you can choose from bullet points, to-do lists, or even mind maps. Your data's safe too, with end-to-end encryption and global privacy compliance. And with Claude's built-in AI, you can search everything you've ever recorded just by asking a question. It's slim, magnetic, under 30 grams, lasts up to 60 days on standby, and over 1 million people are already using it. Hit the link in the description and use code GB10 for £10 off your Claude order. Save hours of time and never miss a detail again. Link in the description below.
There is one other tension point here, though, isn't there, Catherine, which is the Boris wave, the issue of immigration, which, of course, many Reform voters are very concerned about. And, of course, they do associate that big increase in post-COVID immigration with the Johnson regime. So is Nadine Dorries rejecting that? Is she expressing a view on that? Is this going to potentially become a tension between the Reformers and the former Conservatives who perhaps are more supportive of the Johnson administration? What's your initial reaction to some of that? Because if you look on social media, that is already doing the rounds among some who are saying, well, you know, after Jake Berry here, you have another ex-Conservative politician who isn't completely in line, it appears, as you just mentioned, with the Online Safety Act and perhaps also potentially on immigration, with where those Reform voters are. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because Reform now touting mass deportations are taking an incredibly tough line on immigration. And Boris Johnson, for all that Brexit was to take back control of our borders, and he said to me yesterday, I got back control of our borders. But what did they do with it? They replaced unlimited EU migration with a points-based system. And under Boris Johnson, legal migration went up to 1 million, as you say, just shy of 1 million. They called it the Boris wave. Now, I said to Boris Johnson the other day, part of this, you know, is on you. And he said, look, in my first year, I got net migration down to the lowest level for 40 years. Well, sure, that was COVID. There was a global pandemic. People were not coming in or out of the country. And I said to him, you know, the Boris wave up to 1 million. And he said, well, you know, Ukrainian students, etc. But look, it was much more than that. It was conscious decisions that were made to bring in workers from all these other countries around the world rather than EU, you know, this dependence on immigration that we've seen for so long, although successive governments have promised us something different.
Great. Well, we're going to get a bit more reaction to this now, coming back to the studio. We've got a panel in here, Catherine, so thanks for your initial reaction. Journalist and broadcaster Linda Jubilee and historian and author Dr. Tessa Dunlop. Do we have some initial reactions to this defection of Nadine Dorries? Do we think this is potentially as significant as some are making out?
Well, Catherine referred to it as a spectacular win, but given that Nadine Dorries, I mean, she's sort of Boris Johnson's fluffy blonde attack dog, wasn't she really? She's no longer a sitting MP. Even when she was a sitting MP, she started trolling the Conservative Party from within the Conservative Party and then couldn't be winched out of her seat quick enough. So I don't think this is surprising, and it won't deliver necessarily another seat for Reform at the next election, given that she's not sitting. It's just what I sort of call fluff. It's a sort of fart in the calendar.
Linda.
But it's a very high-profile move, and I think that this will help Reform, because Nadine Dorries, whatever you think of her, and I've read her book, and I think it's entertaining but a little bit naive. To think that kind of politicking is anywhere kind of scandalous revelation was ridiculous. That's just the way politics works. I think she is still a high-profile ex-cabinet minister who many people perceive to have stood up to the axis of posh public school boys of David Cameron and George Osborne. Now, a lot of people like her, and a lot of people will think this is a great move. And as far as the tension points of the Boris wave and the online safety bill, I think the amazing thing about politicians, most of all, is perhaps their expediency. And I think what will happen here is that will be forgotten in the interests of the high-profile interaction and resonance she will create.
There are a few people Tessa saying online, well, we've got a lot of Conservatives. We've got a lot of former Conservatives. You've got Jake Berry, Nadine Dorries. You've got a lot of local, regional Conservatives joining. Where are the Labour people? Where are the ex-Lib Dems? Where are the none of the aboves? And, you know, in order to get that big, broad tent, that coalition of people to win the country, you know, imagine you're a voter in the Red Wall and you're watching all of this and you're thinking, well, is this a none of the above party, an anti-establishment party, or is this a home for disillusioned former Conservatives who feel badly about how Boris Johnson was treated?
Yeah, baby girl never got her seat in the Lords. I mean, do you remember that was one of her big beefs, wasn't it? That actually she wanted to wear ermine and swan off into this sort of long legal grass in that swollen second chamber. I think you make the point that she was the working class girl, and that, in a sense, helps her cut through across both blue and red walls. But on the other hand, it does have a very retro feel, this. It's not moving reform into a brave new world, but rather reinforcing where it's parked its main guns facing the Conservative Party. If it really wants to have that massive breakthrough, then I don't see it happening here.
But the other thing I was just going to say, Linda, is, you know, there are a lot of people outside of politics that potentially could be brought in, the celebrities, the public figures and so forth. Now, maybe they're being held back deliberately. Maybe there's a sequencing that's going on here.
Yeah.
That, you know, Nigel Farage and his team have got a longer-term plan. But to build this cross-class coalition, this cross-country coalition of people, you're going to need more than former Conservatives.
I think you've got to have a really big plan and you've got to implement it really diligently. Let's not forget David Cameron's disastrous attempt at opening the list to ordinary people. I mean, that was just a silly PR ploy. This has to be done seriously, and I agree with Tessa. You know, the reform has to have a much wider appeal to the voter, because the voter is disillusioned with politics in general.
Especially establishment politics. And Nadine Dorries in many ways personifies that.
No, I don't think she does.
Well, but towards the end, there was trolling within her own constituency, graffiti, Nadine Dorries out, because there she was taking her swollen, compared to many people's salaries, MP pay, and she wasn't actually acting as a constituency MP.
But she is rebellious, she's countercultural, she's got that sort of common touch.
She's got grit in the oyster.
Absolutely, she has.
A bit. But she's also heavily tainted by the Boris Johnson administration.
This is someone who started in the NHS, someone who worked, you know, shift work, someone who, you know, who has led a fairly ordinary life to start with, and then actually made an incredible success of writing these chick-lit novels that turned her into a multi-millionairess. I mean, you can't deny the amount of hard work she put into her career before ever going into politics.
But as we're seeing with Angela Rayner at the moment, don't matter where you come from. Ultimately, it's what you did yesterday and perhaps the day before yesterday.
Oh, of course, I would believe that.
We are also on the eve of a very important conference for reform where we're going to see a number of big announcements and also people taken to the stage, including Nadine Dorries. It's a really pivotal 48 hours ahead for Nigel Farage and his party.